I wasn't born a monster. I was made in the alleys of Colombia where hunger howls, louder than prayers, and children disappear without a trace. By the time the police caught up, over 140 children were gone, vanished, buried, forgotten by the world, but not by me. They called me Bestia, the Beast, the most prolific serial killer in modern history. I didn't hunt for money. I didn't kill for revenge. I did it because the voices told me to, and I listened. Candy in my pocket, a fake charity badge, a crooked smile, that's all. They followed me into the jungle, and I never brought them back. But this isn't a story about how I got caught. This is about what happened after, when the courts gave me just 22 years, and the world learned the truth too late. Now I sit in a cage, while the country that birthed me tries to bury my name, but the shadows I left behind won't stay dead, because monsters don't live in the dark anymore. Sometimes they walk in broad daylight, with your child's hand in theirs. I was born in hell, though they called it Colombia. The sun always felt too bright, the laughter of children too loud. It all scratched at the inside of my skull like nails clawing wood. I wasn't always a monster, not exactly. I was a boy once, too hungry, beaten, forgotten, left to rot in a drunken father's silence and at mother's bitter stares. But you're not here to hear my excuses. You want the truth, the raw, ugly truth behind the name they now spit through clenched teeth. Bestia, the Beast. Fine, I'll give it to you, the first one. I remember his name, but I won't say it. You don't get that satisfaction. He was small, smaller than me at that age. Alone, dirt smudged across his cheeks. He reminded me of me. I offered him a toy dinosaur, something I picked up from a bin outside a cheap market. He smiled like I was Santa Claus. It made my skin crawl, not with guilt, but with electricity. With power, we walked for hours. I lied, said I worked with a charity, told him he'd get candy, food, maybe even a bed to sleep in. What he got was a patch of empty land outside Pereira. The soil there is still cursed, I think. Some nights I swear I can still hear the wind carrying his screams. The first is always the hardest. I shook, I vomited, I ran, but the next one was easier. I learned their routines. Street kids were everywhere, invisible, disposable. No one asked questions. They were already ghosts before I found them. I simply helped them disappear. The uniform helped. A fake government ID, a charity vest, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses to look harmless. The wolf dressed as a shepherd. Isn't that what they always say? Do you know how many there were? Of course you don't. You only know the number they tell you. 140 confirmed. But I know more. I remember faces. I remember the twitch in their legs, the look in their eyes when they realized they weren't going home. I buried them in rows, sometimes like crops. Other times, I left them where they fell. The heat would take care of the rest, or the dogs, or the flies. Colombia eats the dead without question. I didn't kill out of hate, not at first. I killed to silence the voices, the ones that screamed inside my skull, the ones that sounded like my father, like me, like God. But don't worry, they caught me. Eventually you think that's the ending. No, that's where it really begins, because even cages can't contain beasts forever. They handcuffed me in broad daylight, Prol, 22nd, 1999, the outskirts of Bogota. I remember the sky was overcast, as if even the clouds recoiled at what I had done. A traffic stop, they said, routine. They didn't know how routine I had made it for myself to slip between the cracks of Colombian justice. When they found the bodies in Quindio, the bones lay exposed like a field of broken dolls. Hundreds of fragments, scattered by time and scavengers. Every skull, every rib, whispered the same question: why? And the nation screamed back: how many more? The investigators were clumsy at first. Street kids left no footprints worth following. Witnesses vanished. Files went missing. But then the pattern emerged: 22 points on the map where I had left my mark. Candy wrappers, a torn charity vest, a single shoe, half buried in mud. They dusted for prints, traced the edges of my deception. I sat in the cell, the fluorescent bulbs humming overhead, painting my face in pleading white light. They called for mental evaluations. Psychiatrists rattled off Latin phrases: antisocial personality disorder, psychopathic tendencies, compulsive homicidal fantasies. They stitched their terms around me like a noose. In court, the prosecutor's voice cracked: you destroyed childhoods. You stole innocence. The families of victims wept behind him, clutching photographs of missing sons and daughters. Watched them with clinical interest, no empathy, only curiosity. When asked if I felt remorse, I smiled. I had already buried remorse alongside my victims. Yet, and here is the cruelest irony, the law had limits. At that time, Colombian maximum penalty was 22 years. 22 years to pay homage to over 300 souls. The judge recited the sentence: 22 años de prisión. It sounded inadequate, a cruel joke. Outside, the public roared. Protesters hurled stones at the courthouse, spilling red paint to symbolize the blood I shed. When they marched me through the streets, shackled and diminished, they thought justice was served. They chanted no early release, as if any could compensate for the nightmares I planted. But justice, I learned, is a matter of laws and loopholes, not of right and wrong. Behind bars, I discovered a new stage for my performance. My name became a brand. Interviews sought my confession. Journalists pressed recorders to the steel bars. I wrote letters, cold, precise chronicles of my crimes, knowing they would feed a hungry public. Every page I inked was another scar on Colombia's psyche. They think a prison cell can contain a beast, but beasts don't sleep. They watch, they remember, they adapt, and when the world forgets, they roar again, echoing through the cracks of a fragile justice system. They carved my name into the sidewalks of Pereira. Graffiti in red: La Bestia. Children fled closed doorways at the syllable's echo. Mothers pulled their little ones tighter into motherton shawls. Fathers spat curses at empty streets, as if my phantom might slink between their legs and slip away into the night. But it was not me they feared, it was the memory of me. The truth that any predator can wear a smile, a uniform, a kindly voice. The knowing glance I once offered before pulling a boy by the hand into the void. After the trial, the surviving relatives organized support groups in dusty storefronts. Women with hollowed eyes clasped trembling mugs of coffee. They shared stolen photographs, some faded faces with hopeful eyes. Their tears whispered names the world had almost forgotten. Names like Pepito 13, who sold shoelaces at the train station. Marcelita 9, who dreamed of becoming a schoolteacher. Andres 12, whose laughs sounded like church bells. I watched those meetings with perverse fascination. Doctor entered the room, cameras rolling, capturing every sob. They called it healing. But how does one heal from a wound that still bleeds? Meanwhile, The government unveiled reforms hotlines for missing children, stiffened penalties, social programs to feed the hungry mouths of the streets. Yet the programs faltered like a broken promise. Most funds disappeared in bureaucratic labyrinths. Cash vanished before children saw a single loaf of bread. And so I remained a legend, a name that revealed the failings of society: poverty, neglect, indifference. They plastered my face on wanted posters after the fact. They produced TV specials and true crime books. They launched podcasts that whispered my deeds into the ears of thrill seekers worldwide. I became the monster they needed, the embodiment of every fear that evil can masquerade as salvation. That innocence is a fragile bird, one careless hand away from breaking its wings. Yet, somewhere in an overcrowded cell, I pondered the irony. They branded me the beast, but they built a zoo around me. Tour groups clambered outside my window, snapping photos of the bars and my haggard silhouette. They treated my life as spectacle, my crimes as entertainment. I don't know whether to laugh or scream. The same audience that once ignored the hungry children now paid to hear my whispered confessions. Each playback, each retelling, fueled the legend. And legends, unlike bodies, do not rot. On quiet nights, when the prison yard is empty and the guards trace their rounds with indifferent steps, I press my face against the bars and listen to the wind. I imagine it carries the voices of those I silenced, a choir of broken dreams. Their echo fills my skull, relentless. Sometimes I whisper back, not apologies, left those buried with my victims. Instead, I offer them a confession that I was neither hero nor villain, but a reflection. A dark mirror held to a society that turned its back on its weakest dot. So remember me, not only for the horror I wrought, but for the echoes I exposed, the cracks in the pavement where children vanish, the shadows that linger in narrow alleys, the silence that follows a kind voice. Because monsters do not arise from nowhere, they are shaped by the world's neglect. And when you close your eyes at night, listen for the echoes in the asphalt. They may be calling your name. They say the methods reveal the monster. If that's true, then mine read like a twisted instruction, manual pages stained with fear and bone dust. I perfected each step as though crafting a macabre sculpture. First, the lure, a bright wrapper of candy that gleamed under streetlights, or a worn teddy bear, its fur patched and familiar. The child approached with cautious hope, eyes wide like birds contemplating flight. I would smile softly, offer a reassuring tone. Come with me. I'd whisper, I have something for you. Then, the walk. I memorized every back alley, every crumbling wall. We moved swiftly, shadows our companions. The silence pressed against us, the only proof that something sacred or evil was about to happen. I never looked at them in the eyes. For too long, I wanted to see only the trust, not the suspicion that could break the illusion. At the sight a hidden clearing of scrub and broken branches, I took my time. They thought it was a game. Wait here, I told them. I'll be right back. Their small forms huddled against the dirt, unaware that their world was collapsing. The tools were simple, brutal, a length of scarf to bind wrists, a small blade to silence screams, a rag soaked in ether to dull consciousness. I treated each instrument as an extension of my will, folding them into my pockets as one folds memories carefully, to be unpacked later. When the ritual began, I spoke soft assurances. You'll sleep now, I promised, though only I slept that night. Their eyes fluttered shut, and I watched the last spark of innocence die in those lashes. Some fell without struggle, others fought until their strength sapped from every muscle. The sound of snapping bones echoed like thunder in the clearing. I learned to savor the aftermath, the stillness, the finality. My heartbeat slowed to match the hush of death. I drew patterns in the dirt circles around the body, symbols borrowed from forgotten superstitions, as if invoking protection for my secret. Each mark was a signature, an oath that I would never reveal. Later, I would return with a shovel. The method varied. Mass graves in remote fields, solitary burials beneath loose soil, or leaving a single bone fragment exposed a morbid calling card to the authorities. They found patterns, but never the whole tapestry. I reveled in their frustration. Even now, behind concrete walls, I dissect my motives. I told the psychiatrists it was compulsion and urge I could not resist. I called it destiny, a corrupt seed, planted in my childhood, watered by neglect and pain. Sometimes I feared I believed my own lies. Between confessions, I drift into memories. The ache when a child's laughter echoed my own broken childhood. The thrill when their trust mirrored a fleeting moment of salvation I never found. Guilt, it's a myth I buried long ago. What remains is the truth. I was both hunter and prey, sculptor and clay, forever torn between the need to punish the world and the desire to be seen. And so I await my next audience, because stories demand an ending. But monsters, true monsters, exist. In their own narrative, writing chapters no prosecutor can erase. They say time heals all wounds, but time here is a broken clock, its hands ticking over scars that never fade. I hear their voices in the courtyard, mothers who searched alleys until dawn, fathers who tore down walls with bare hands in frantic hope. Street children who escaped my grasp still tremble at every rustle. The survivors formed unlikely bonds. Children who once whispered secrets of fear now shared stories of resilience. They gathered in the wrecked shells of abandoned buildings, painting murals of lost friends on crumbling walls. Each face they honored was a promise: you will not be forgotten. Their defiance became a beacon. One boy, Esteban, lost his little brother in my game. He carved a flute from scavenged wood and played a haunting melody each sunset. It drifted across the barrio like a lamentation, reminding everyone of lives cut shortened, the fragile spark of hope still flickering. Psychologists and social workers flooded the neighborhoods, armed with questionnaires and pamphlets. They offered counseling, but words are hollow in lips that once tasted blood. Healing came instead in small gestures: a teacher kneeling to tie torn shoes, a neighbor sharing a bowl of soup, a volunteer handing out pencils to children who had never held one. Each act was a stitch in a ragged tapestry of recovery. Meanwhile, my legend grew darker. Black market pamphlets surfaced with lurid illustrations of my crimes. Tourists sent postcards featuring my mugshot, captioned with morbid jokes. They wore t-shirts bearing the phrase, "La Bestia lives." The absurdity, the commodification of horror, made me pause even in my own apathy in prison. I watched from behind triple-layered glass as death row inmates performed plays about my deeds, actors draped in torn charity vests. Their audiences cheered at every incantation of my name. It was a grotesque celebration, murder as theater, pain as spectacle. Outside, lawmakers debated, should they raise the maximum sentence? Should they allow life without parole? Should they never let me see daylight again? Each proposal faltered. On political turf, buried under competing agendas. The law moved slowly, always one step behind the shadows I cast. Yet, amid the chaos, a fragile hope emerged. Grassroots groups demanded real reform: safe shelters for street children, mandatory background checks for charity workers, community patrols to watch over vulnerable kids. They organized midnight vigils, lighting candles on sidewalks where bones once lay. In that flickering glow, the children's names were spoken, loud voices rising in unison against oblivion. I have no stake in their fight anymore. My world is concrete, steel bars, fluorescent hum. But sometimes, when the evening sky bleeds pink and the wind carries distant chants, I close my eyes and imagine a different story. One where those children walk free, their laughter untainted by fear. Monsters cast long shadows, but light, no matter how faint, can stretch even further. I spent the first years behind bars thinking redemption was for saints and martyrs, not for monsters like me. But redemption isn't a gift, it's a question. A question asked by the survivors when they look into a mirror and decide whether to live or be consumed by rage. In my cell, I trace my own face on the wall, haggard, hollowed by time and regret. The lines around my eyes deepen with every confession I write, every letter I send to families who refused to read. Behind each word lies a plea: remember me, but do not become me. Outside, Colombia continued its dance with darkness and light. New cases of abducted children still surfaced, reminders that evil never sleeps. Yet alongside the fear, a network of survivors and advocates wove themselves into a safety net. Shelters expanded, host families volunteered, and street outreach workers patrolled with flashlights and cell phones. Some nights, I received clandestine reports. A boy we thought lost has returned, or a girl escaped and is now in school. These bulletins arrive, folded into envelopes, no return address, just hope written in shaky handwriting. I read them under the dim lamp, letting their words pierce the cement around my heart. Redemption for them means a future unmarked by my cruelty. For me, it means owning my truth without hiding behind psychiatric jargon or legal loopholes. I've begun to speak in my own voice no longer. The calm narrator who described bones and blood as art but a man stripped of illusions. I've offered apologies that feel inadequate, but I offer them all the same. Will they forgive me? I don't deserve forgiveness. I suspect many never will. But forgiveness isn't the point. Accountability is. If my suffering, cold, isolated, endless, can teach even one person to see the cracks before they swallow a child, then perhaps something remains of my humanity. On days when the yard erupts with shouts, when guards shout back and the clank of metal doors echoes like a funeral march, I close my eyes and recall Esteban's flute. I imagine its melody weaving through corridors, softening the harsh edges of steel. I feel, for the first time, a flicker of connection to a world beyond my crimes. This story ends not with a final body count or a courtroom drama, but with questions that have no single answer. Can a nation scarred by horror find true healing? Can survivors transform trauma into strength? Can a man who embodied evil become a cautionary tale that saves lives? I do not know, but I leave you with this: evil thrives in silence and neglect. If you choose to listen to those whispers on asphalt, to the hush of empty playgrounds at dusk, then you become part of the reckoning. You carry the torch for the lost dot. In that flicker of awareness, redemption begins. Even in ruins, life finds a way to grow.